This is a really important section. You absolutely have to know the AWS Shared Responsibility Model for the exam. Now, you can get quite a few questions there. There could be 4 or 5 questions on your exam which relate to the Shared Responsibility Model, sometimes even more. And they shouldn't be too difficult. So once we've been through this, I think you'll understand it very well. And this all falls under domain 2 here, so security. Define the AWS Shared Responsibility Model. And before we go over to the questions, I just want to give you a real high level of this. And this is a graphic from the AWS website. And this basically shows you on the bottom here, you have AWS's responsibility. So this is all AWS. They are responsible for what they say is security of the cloud. That includes the regions, the availability zones, the edge locations, the compute hardware, the storage, the database, the networking, and they also have a layer of software on top of these. So they have things like hypervisors and management systems and so on that's completely their responsibility. Now, at the top half here, we have the customer. So the customer of AWS who's using AWS Cloud Services is responsible for what they call security in the cloud. So that means all this stuff. So client-side data encryption, server-side encryption. So basically all encryption is your responsibility. Networking traffic protection, including encryption again. Operating systems, so your Linux or Windows instances running on Amazon EC2, you're responsible for patching those operating systems, configuring those operating systems, securing them. And network and firewall configurations, so things like security groups, network access control lists, as well as route tables. And then all of your platforms, so your applications themselves, you've got to secure those properly. That's your responsibility, and manage them properly. And then identity and access management, so it's up to you to create the right users, groups, roles, and policies. And then your data sitting at the top here. So it's always the customer's responsibility to look after their data and to make sure that they've configured it properly for backup, that they've secured it properly with access control lists, with policies, and potentially with encryption as well. So let's move over now to the practice exam, and we're going to start this one up. Under the shared responsibility model, which of the following tasks are the responsibility of the AWS customer? So the customer of AWS. So what are they responsible for? We've got to find 2 answers here. So our customers responsible for ensuring that application data is encrypted at rest. Well, I just gave you a bit of a description there, so hopefully you know the answer to this one. Yes, absolutely. As a customer, you are responsible for encryption of data at rest. Now, what about is the customer responsible for ensuring that the AWS network time protocol servers are set to the correct time? Well, you can probably imagine, no, that's not your responsibility. So NTP is a protocol used for configuring time amongst multiple systems. That's absolutely an AWS responsibility. Does the customer have to ensure that users have received security training in the usage of AWS services? Well, yes, this is a really good one. So absolutely, when you move into the cloud, you've got to make sure that your employees, your staff are trained properly so they know how to secure things in the cloud. Because remember, there's a lot of aspects of security that are customer responsibilities. So if you don't configure them properly, you might have a security breach. So that is something which you have to take responsibility for as a customer. So I like these 2 answers. Let's just check the last ones. Do you as a customer need to ensure that access to data centers is restricted? Well, no. Again, that's going to be AWS. They manage the data centers. And what about disposing of hardware? Who's responsible for that? Well, again, that's going to be AWS. Anything in the physical realm is not your responsibility as a customer. So I think these 2 answers are the best answers. Let's just check those out. And yes, those are the correct answers. Now let's have a quick look at a slide. So just remember that AWS are responsible for security of the cloud. So that means, the physical infrastructure that runs the services that you use on AWS, the hardware, the software, the networking, and the facilities as well. And then as a customer, you're responsible for security in the cloud. That means things like network access control lists, security groups, your operating systems, you've got to patch them, you've got to update those, you've got to configure your identity and access management service, and you've got to make sure that you take responsibility for encrypting your own data. So we've got another question here. Now you will find that a lot of these questions are fairly similar. The key thing is to work out, are they asking you for the customer responsibilities or the AWS responsibilities? In this case, again, it's the customer. So what is the customer responsible for? What about setting up server-side encryption on an S3 bucket? Absolutely. So we've talked about that quite a bit already. So yes, you are responsible always for securing your data. And that can be at rest. So when your data is stored, for instance, on S3 or in an Amazon EBS volume, you've got to make sure it's encrypted. But also while you're transferring your data, that's known as encryption in transit, you've got to make sure that you set up things like your SSL TLS certificates to make sure that the data is encrypted as it's moving across a network in case it's intercepted. What about Amazon RDS instance patching? So as you know, Amazon Relational Database Service is a managed service, and that means that the patching of the operating system and updates to the database software as well is something that AWS manage, and you can configure when that happens using what's called a maintenance window. So that's not a customer responsibility. Now, what about network and firewall configurations? Well, don't think about this as being always physical. Like we often think about networks and firewalls as being sometimes physical devices, especially if you've been working in IT for a long time, like I have, where that also always used to be a physical device, but it's not anymore. And in this case, we are talking about things like security groups and network access control lists, firewalls on your operating systems, or it could be the AWS Web Application Firewall. So yes, those are things that you can configure as a customer. Now, physical security of the data center facilities, again, when it's the data center, straight away you know that that's not going to be you. And physical security, that's not going to be the customer either. So absolutely not. Compute capacity availability, well, that's what AWS are responsible for. They should make sure that when you need it, the capacity is available. So I think, again, these are the two best answers. So we'll just check those out. And yes, those are the correct answers. Now, I just want to give you another diagram here. This is one that I put together just to give you a few examples. Hopefully a visual will really help you to remember things. So just remember on the bottom end here, we've got AWS. This is what they are responsible for. You've got the data center. You've got the data center security. So the people that operate the data center and make sure that it's all physically secured. The physical network routers, the physical network switches, the servers, the physical ones that run things like EC2 and other services on top of them, you're not responsible for the physical layer. Same with storage and disk drives. So anything like disposal of disk drives, you'll see that sometimes in exam questions. That's not you. What about database servers? Well, the same thing. So sometimes you get managed database servers like DynamoDB, where you just create your tables. The database already exists. So that's AWS, and they are responsible for managing the patch management and the security of that layer. And then you still have some elements of security responsibility as well. So then on the top half, we've got staff training. So again, you've got to make sure that your staff are trained properly. And AWS are responsible for managing their own staff, so ensuring their own staff have training. You've got to make sure that your buckets and objects are secured, that your data is encrypted in transit and rest. You create IAM users and roles correctly so that you give the right privileges to the right people. You configure multi-factor authentication so that you have a second factor of authentication when people log in. And network ACLs, it's up to you to secure your subnets with network ACLs or your instances with security groups. SSL encryption is about data in transit, making sure that's encrypted. Patch management, you've got to patch manage your own systems like EC2 and manage EC2 at any level. So you've got to manage any security for the operating system and manage the availability as well through auto scaling and load balancing. So hopefully that helps you a little bit in understanding better the delineation of responsibilities here.